Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope you can see me from there.
Very clearly. I can hear you as well.
I was kind of surprised when I walked in this morning to find that we were relegated from the front seat to the back seat. I was kind of wondering, Mr. Speaker, that probably you and the government want to hide us away from, the front. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, you will still be able to hear me, and the government will still be able to hear me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the opposition didn't make the decision. Get your facts right. Get your facts right. That's the only thing they have to discuss that. Let me, Mr. Speaker, also say that this morning there was this despicable, shameful attack by Honorable Koya and Honorable Ayaz Sayed Kuyum on the Auditor General. Well, let me tell them, no amount of attack on the Auditor General.
Point of order.
What's your point of order?
Mr. Speaker said, my motion for debate was that the Parliament debates a review of Fiji Development Bank 2019 annual report. Please.
Thank you.
Honourable member should not waste Parliament's time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was saying that no amount of attack by both the honourable members on the Auditor General is going to hide the fact about the poor and disastrous economic and financial management in this country. Coming back on the report, Mr. Speaker, I see that the Honourable Vijay Nath, talked about bank's lending portfolio growing to 539.75 million at the end of the financial year, with the loan portfolio representing a customer base of 5,149 accounts. Page 6 of the 2019 annual report, Mr. Speaker, shows a breakdown of this portfolio figure, which talks about the non-focus sector and the value, the non-focus sector, the value is listed, the value is 305.75 million. And the focus sector is 234 million. So, Mr. Speaker, the increase from 2018 to 2019 for the non-focus sector was 39.68 million, whereas the difference for the focus sector was only 13.02 million. So, indeed, the bank's portfolio grew, but not for the sectors that FDB, the Fiji Development Bank, should be focusing on. The committee doesn't highlight that. Because when you turn the pages, page 39, that the report highlights that the 2008 realignment classified sectors into focused and non-focused sectors meant that most closely aligned to the bank's mission and vision is the focus sector. The sector that FDB should be focusing on, but is only doing so by number of loans, not the actual value. The non-focus sector comprises investment opportunities that are essentially commercial, corporate, essential for the long-term sustainability of the bank. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is important to look at that particular information and relate that to the overall government policy in terms of growing the economy. And what we have seen is a complete opposite of what has been happening in terms of the economic management in this country. And I want to highlight this, Mr. Speaker, and this report, the recent report which came out in November 2021, Fiji country classification by the ADB, should be a sober reading for all the members on the government side. Because what this report shows, Mr. Speaker, that well before COVID, we had forgotten about the real direction of the economy. We did not focus on the real sectors of the economy, and FDB's statistics shows that we did not focus, that the bank did not concentrate on the focus sector. So we had poor economic management, poor economic policies, poor debt management, modest foreign direct investment, narrow base of the economy. The report talks about the narrow base of the economy. And this is what we have been saying, Mr. Speaker, in this parliament for the last 7 years. Here is a government which spent 7 years borrowing and spending on sectors which did not allow us to grow as the real economy. You look at the sugar industry, you look at the dairy industry, you look at the forestry industry, you look at the overall agriculture sector. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture is trying very hard these days, and I would like to commend him. At least he's brought back the focus. But imagine, Mr. Speaker, if the FDB had focused where the priority should have been, if government had focused on the agriculture sector, if it had not destroyed the sugar industry, if we are still producing 3 million tons of cane, if we are still having the dairy industry that we used to have, Mr. Speaker, today, after the onslaught of COVID-19 pandemic on this country, we would not be in this kind of economic ravage that we have seen before the COVID-19 pandemic. And this report, Mr. Speaker, let me just read 1 or 2 paragraphs. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the growth, FDB figures show that the growth rate between 2010 and 2020 averaged only 3.5%. We used to hear this big song and dance about unprecedented growth. And then we had this Bainimrama boom. And look at 2015. Let me give you another statistics. From 2015 to 2019, the average growth rate was only 3.1%. The so-called Bainimrama boom that they were talking about. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a modest growth based on unrelented borrowing and well, that's the only word he knows, Mr. Speaker, hogwash. And I remember in the last session, while hogwashing, he meandered to Rwanda and Solomon Islands.
Order.
So, the fact is a bitter truth for them. The fact of the matter is that between 2015 and 2019, we had a modest growth of 3.1%, a modest foreign investment, poverty rate increased slightly before COVID-19, and the bank says it very, very clearly. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have been downgraded from C to B. It's not like a economic grade where, from C to B is an improvement. This shows that we are now a blended country classification, which shows that we, and in fact the bank points out in this report, they should all read this, that we were at the risk of debt distress before the COVID-19 pandemic onslaught on this country. Now that is, and the reason, Mr. Speaker, why we are in this situation today is the type of example that you see coming from the Fiji Development Bank. And let me talk about this 200 million FDB COVID recovery credit grantee scheme, and I want to raise some questions here. And I hope that Honorable Koya, I'm sure he will speak on this, should be able to answer. This 200 million COVID-19 recovery granted scheme, Mr. Speaker, in my view, and given FDB's mandate, should have been on the focus sector. The question I want to ask, because there's so many people, Mr. Speaker, that have come to us, that have sent us the letters from the FDB, which gives them no reason why the loan was declined. And people are also telling me that those who applied in the first instance, they all got whatever they applied. And I'm also told, Mr. Speaker, and I want this to be, I stand to be corrected, and I want the Minister to answer this question. I'm also told that many of those who applied for that loan in the first instance were companies, businesses which had arrears with the bank even before the COVID pandemic. Now, what does that mean? My question is, did the bank use this opportunity in dishing out these loans to those who had arrears before the COVID pandemic to actually clear its book on arrears? And whether I have had so many calls, Mr. Speaker, so many letters like this have been sent to me, about why the bank is not giving the reason. Now, it is absolutely important. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the government, have an immediate audit. Ask for an immediate audit of what transpired. What were the kind of businesses who got the support? Why did so many who were affected by the pandemic? I had this young man, a young businessman from Lotoka. I don't want to name him here. But that person has been writing. He wrote to the Honorable Attorney General. I don't know whether he wrote to Mr. Honorable Koya. But he also reached out, and I don't know, because he has not been given any reason why his loan was declined, and his business was only affected after COVID-19. Now, and there were many other examples, Mr. Speaker. So, maybe we should have an immediate audit, because it is important for us to keep the bank focused on the real sectors of the economy. I know recently the Honorable Agriculture Minister the other day in the press conference, emphasized about another scheme which the FDB is going to implement. But it is important that they remain on the focus sector. So it begs a bigger question, Mr. Speaker, and this is what I've said before, that there are some good initiatives that government comes up with. I can understand, the objective, the idea. But whether the implementation of those schemes are properly scrutinized and dealt with. I mean, this has been a problem with this government, that they have engaged in reckless borrowing and spending without making sure that we get the value for money. We must ask for value for money. And Mr. Speaker, may I repeat this again in this Parliament? My estimate of the wastage under this government from 2015 right up to 2020, which I have followed, in terms of the budget and in terms of the projects, many of them remain uncompleted, like the FNU campus, Lotoka swimming pool, etc., etc. And my estimate, Mr. Speaker, is that on average, about $500 million per year from 2015 right up to 2020 has been wasted through pilferage, mismanagement, and lack of value for money that has been given to build infrastructure. And if you put that together, if you add that, it amounts to about $3 billion in 6 years. If this government has any shame, if they have any sense of accountability and transparency, let's have an audit, an independent inquiry into the expenditure from 2015 to 2020, Mr. Speaker, because it is absolutely important, because according to this report, we are going to go through a very, very difficult time in this country. even if we get back to normalcy in terms of tourism and all that, it is going to take us years before we get back to pre-pandemic level economic situation and economic growth. So we must, Mr. Speaker, we must make sure that the accountability that is required from the government on everything possible, is adhered to and made in a transparent and accountable manner. I mean, this constant, loud mouthing of hogwash from the other side is not going to take away the truth of the matter. These constant, threats. I mean, I remember, Mr. Speaker, I remember the same minister who was talking about hogwash. He was trying to threaten the people of this country with Rwanda and Solomon Islands. So, he must get his, facts right. And there are people out there who are only talking about Rabuka. These are people who don't talk about people that were sitting with them from 87. They were sitting with them from 87. They were part of the game. So instead of talking about the real issues, which is where FDB should be going, where we should be going in terms of our policies for real economic sectors, these guys are trying to hogwash, to use his term, to frighten the people. They're already going, Mr. Speaker. I know some of them. One minister in Ba, I'm told, went to a temple and said, don't leave this government because if you leave this government, you'll be in trouble. They're threatening people. They're threatening people. Instead of talking about economic issues. Mr. Speaker, instead of getting hold of a copy of this report and reading about the minister's economic management, the government's economic management, and all the cheerleaders from the other side must read this report. They must read this report because then they will find what is the state of the economic mismanagement in this country, Mr. Speaker. So let me conclude, Mr. Speaker. Let me conclude by saying that we need an immediate audit of the $200 million COVID recovery credit guarantee scheme to ensure that our future schemes by the Fiji Development Bank remains focused on those priority sectors. Because we've had many times that the commercial banks and Honorable Minister of Agriculture is right, that the commercial banks are not willing to give loans to the farmers that easily, those in the agriculture sector. And so let's refocus FDB back to the real sector of the agriculture sector and put our money where our mouth is, instead of bragging about how good our economic policies have been. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable member.